Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm thrilled to be with all of you for our third edition of Cal for All, Thriving Communities for All. Cal for All is a collaboration between the Cal Alumni Association, our Cal alumni chapters, our campus partners, and members of our alumni community. My name is Susie Cohen Crumpler, she, her, and I'm the executive director of the Cal Alumni Association. Welcome. If you've joined us for one of our Cal for All editions in the past, I welcome you back and thank you so much for your continued participation in this really important program. Thank you for joining us again. And for everyone who's joining us for the first time, it's wonderful to have you here with us. Cal for All is aimed at creating a more inclusive alumni community. We bring together Cal alumni from diverse backgrounds to discuss diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. And through this Cal for All series, we hope to engage more segments of the Cal alumni community. We hope to provide a platform to share diverse perspectives on a variety of topics. And we hope to highlight the impact of our alumni chapters, of our campus colleagues, and of our alumni community partnerships. And so those are our goals with our Cal for All series. To our speakers, our panelists, our facilitators, and all of our community members joining us this evening, I welcome you to this space. I'm grateful to be here with all of you, and I'm looking forward to our upcoming discussion. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to the president of the Cal Alumni Association Board of Directors, Kirk Tramble. Kirk brings over 20 years of corporate experience to CAA's board. He earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, EECS, from Berkeley in 1993, and an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College. In his professional life, Kirk has gained extensive experience working at Chevron, Oracle, Microsoft, Apple, Nitro Inc., and most recently, Kazada LLC. Kirk is such a passionate alum, and he works so hard to share Cal's many resources and events with fellow alumni. Kirk serves as a key member of the Black Engineering and Science Alumni Club, BSAC, and I want to welcome Kirk. And Kirk, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Susie, for the introduction. I'm Kirk Tramble, class of '93, serving as president of the Cal Alumni Association's board. It is a privilege to lead and make a difference in our alumni community. As president, I've aimed to positively impact the CAA and our global alumni network. The Cal for All speaker series is central to our mission of fostering inclusivity and dialogue on diversity, equity, and justice. Our efforts, including supporting clubs like the Black Engineering and Science Alumni Club, BSAC, highlight the importance of diverse leadership and inclusive environments. In 2021, BSAC received the Berkeley Award for Outstanding Volunteer Group. Thank you to all of our guests for joining this promising event. I look forward to the discussions ahead. Let's continue to make Cal a place for all. I'll now pass the stage to JoJo for our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Kirk. We recognize that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. And I will turn it back to Susie.
Thanks so much, Jojo. It looks like, there we go. Sorry about that. Looks like we had notes up during the land acknowledgement. Thank you, Jojo, for taking us through that. And sometimes it's just so tricky with the Zoom screen, so please forgive us for that. And we will move forward. So I am now completely honored to introduce our Vice Chancellor for Equity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer, Dania Matos, who will be in discussion with Cathy Han during our fireside chat. Dania leads with love. As the fourth Vice Chancellor for the Division of Equity and Inclusion at UC Berkeley and a member of Chancellor Carol Christ's cabinet, Dania guides strategies that prioritize social justice, anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Specifically, she oversees the division's opportunities for students, staff, and faculty. Dania also leads divisional thriving initiatives, each of which offers culturally responsive services to specific communities across campus. Dania has always championed equity work in the private, nonprofit, and government sectors, and has even taken her talents to Broadway. She was the first Deputy Chief Diversity Officer at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, and served in Virginia's Public Defender's Office. Prior to coming to UC Berkeley, Dania was the first Associate Vice Chancellor and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of California, Merced. Born in Puerto Rico, Dania is proud to have been raised by a single mother and grandmother, two women she credits for shaping her work, advocacy, and leadership style. She holds a JD from Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law, and a bachelor's degree from Brown University. Dania, we are so honored to have you join us this evening. Welcome. And now I'd like to introduce Cathy Han, who's going to facilitate the fireside chat with Dania. Cathy is the Chief Learning Officer at IFC Global, a sustainability advisory and leadership development firm. She is an accomplished executive and a serial social entrepreneur with a multifaceted background. She has experience in innovation and consulting in education, management, nonprofits, and boards of directors across New York, Silicon Valley, and Asia Pacific. A Berkeley, Columbia, and London School of Economics and Political Science alum, Cathy is a strong champion for inclusive economic development, sustainability innovation, future of tech, and community empowerment. She currently serves as the lead DEIBJ alumni chapter advisor for the Cal Alumni Association, board secretary for the Cal Alumni Club of New York, as well as many other leadership roles in the community. Cathy is a millennial mom with personal experiences in single parenthood, and she is driven by the mission to empower holistic wellness and sustainable growth for families and communities. Welcome, Cathy, and welcome, Dania. We look forward to hearing from both of you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Susie, for the kind introduction. I'd like to take a moment to extend our gratitude towards Susie, Kirk, Jojo, Liz, and the amazing CAA team Without their leadership vision and dedicated support, we wouldn't have this inclusive space and engaging platform to foster meaningful dialogue and drive positive change through impactful programs like tonight's CalFOL webinar. It's great to have the Berkeley community together this evening. While we can't compete with President Biden's State of the Union address tonight, we certainly hope that your presence here today will lead to greater impact tomorrow. We'll be taking some questions from the audience and try our best to have the fireside chat speaker and panelists answer your questions in the respective Q&A segments. Please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box. Now let me kick off tonight's fireside chat with our distinguished guest, UC Berkeley Vice Chancellor for Equity Inclusion and Chief DI Officer, Dania Matos. We are honored to have you join us to explore crucial topics sharing our community and beyond. From fostering inclusivity to addressing systematic inequities, Vice Chancellor Matos leads with love and a vision of unity and progress. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Vice Chancellor Dania Matos. So Dania, thank you for joining us tonight. I want to start our fireside chat with a personal touch. I remember meeting you on campus about a year ago, and we exchanged personal stories about growing up in single-parent households. Your background as a first child raised by a single mom and a grandmother from Puerto Rico, I think undoubtedly brings a unique perspective to your leadership journey. How do you believe your personal experiences have influenced your approach to promoting diversity and inclusion within the Berkeley community? I would love to start with that question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cathy. And I want to echo the gratitude to you, to Susie, to Kurt, to Jojo. I know I get in trouble when I start naming names, but to everyone involved and the CAA leadership, also to my team, because of course this is what you see, but there's so much prep and so many people involved in that. So thank you so much. And I apologize to them in advance because I live my life off script. I'll probably go off script too, but they know this already. And then thanks to all of you, this amazing alumni community. Thank you for sharing the gift of your time. I know I'm just easing into my evening, which is going to go into a long time, but depending on where you are in the world, you may be well into your night or in the middle of your day. And it's so nourishing to be in community together and share that. I love that we're lifting up single parent households. One of the things I talk about often is it's such a privilege to lead a division that really represents so many parts of me. We have a student parent center, we have formerly incarcerated students program, our undergrad scholars, so little pieces of my life and trajectory I now get to do. I always tell my mom, I said, wow, it would have been great if there was a student parent center around now. So I also feel like I'm healing the inner child, both for them and my family. And so really thinking about the incredibleness of the strong lineage of women. I know we're Women's Empowerment Month, so I also think this is very apropos. But my mom always ensured I knew I was inheriting a struggle and I had a responsibility to do something about the world. She also taught me that the world was going to be really good at telling me everything I'm not. So I had to be really good at knowing everything that I am, who I am, where I was from, including, especially as an Afro-Latina, Black Latina, right? That Blackness and being proud of that diasporic aspect. And really thinking about kind of that trajectory and sacrifice. I witnessed my mom sacrifice everything. We left Puerto Rico very young because she wanted to be an example to her 2-year-old daughter and finish college due to some protests that were happening on there. And so recognizing the transformative power of education and not a responsibility to speak for others, but to create room for others to speak for themselves was something that was really inculcated for me early on. I also sort of was the eldest of 3, and really helping my mom navigate and shape their trajectories was really important. I just read an article that there's an eldest child syndrome or eldest daughter syndrome. That so resonated with me of really thinking about all the things you take on and kind of grow up a little quicker than you should because of some of those responsibilities. But having that foundational part in rooting was really critical for me because I'm really thinking about what zealous advocacy means, but also knowing that there were so many parts of me, right? That it wasn't limited to a box or something that was checked, but thinking about even our students, they're so multi-talented and multi-interested, and allowing them to know that they can make an impact on the world in so many different ways. I never imagined being the 4th Vice Chancellor at the #1 public research university. For me, it was thinking about what are the transformative spaces and places to make an impact, because as we know, those things also shape who we are. But there's so many who go into this work, not only as subject matter experts, but also deeply passionate about it. So that means that it really impacts you. I always say my heart often breaks in a million pieces, right? When things are happening, and how do you put it back together, knowing that there might be a small piece missing and that you're forever changed by it. Many know that there was a really big sweep in these sort of career positions, and now we're seeing a different shift of that. But for me, it was thinking about what that relentless pursuit of equity and justice look like. I remember even with my family, when it was new, they were sort of like, what is this about? Like, what do you know, you're leaving a good federal government job to go into this? What does that mean? And now I get texts of like, are you doing this? Are you advocating for this? What, what about this? And so it transformed my family, as well as our own consciousness and learning kept growing. So to be able to grow up in a multi-generational household has been such a privilege, because I've seen that generational love, that generational advocacy, inviting all the ancestors in, and really recognizing that this is community work, right? And that it's not about an individual, but thinking about the collective. And so for me, I always say it is so, and I'm so intentional about showing up authentically, because I want others to see themselves in it, right? So when you show up authentically, you create a mirror for people to see themselves in it, right? So if it's red lipstick, my gold hoops, sometimes I'm really into Nikes right now. So like I show up with a lot of those, and it's interesting to see how sometimes people don't think I'm a vice chancellor. I'm not treated that way based on what I'm wearing or how I look, right? So it's an interesting social experiment as well in that. And so for me, it's really thinking about wanting others to see themselves so that they too can be the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th Vice Chancellor of Equity and Inclusion at UC Berkeley. We just celebrated our 15 years. So we're throwing kind of a quinceañera, a 15-year celebration of the Division of Equity and Inclusion, tiaras included for those who wanted, but really thinking about, we were the first division in the UC system, right? So what does 15 years and beyond look like in this work? And so I get to invite in, family and the community and other people into this work. And so thank you. I'm also going to give a shout out to my mommy. She's not feeling well right now. So I'm getting texts about Instacarting chicken soup and all those things, but sending healing thoughts to all of that as she joins and watches us as well.
Thank you, Dania, for sharing your remarkable journey, and best wishes to your mom for recovery. I love what you just shared, and it's really leading to our next question in terms of your leadership framework of lead with love. I think that's an amazing framework that you're bringing into the UC Berkeley system. Could you elaborate on that framework and how that has influenced DEIBJ efforts at Berkeley, and how does that help foster collaboration across campus units?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the world needs more of it, and it's not a word we often use in the context of corporations, companies, even higher education spaces. So I always go into the, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. My voice is not the same from Broadway, y'all, but I wasn't even anticipating doing that. But really thinking about, how do we center people and their humanity in all of this, right? This is really heart work. And, it's not devalued from head work or heart work or what the combination of the two is. But really that framework emphasizes, what does purpose, empathy, compassion, and collaboration look like in serving the cornerstone of equity inclusion work at Berkeley, and giving a pathway for that collective approach to change, right? So not one individual holds the knowledge, but we as a collective community of scholars and experts and researchers hold that knowledge together. And that's far more successful than one of us going at it alone. It's really also fostered a culture of really thinking about shared responsibility in transforming our campus and cross collaboration across units, advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. And also really thinking about those places. I'm reflecting this morning, I spoke to our equity advising program, and one of the questions was, what was your earliest form of lead with love? And I had forgotten about the story, but my grandmother was an educator in Puerto Rico for about 30 years. She taught at a public school that had been closed during the Trump administration, but the community came together to reopen it. And it served first-generation low-income students. And I would spend my summers in Puerto Rico with my grandmother. And what I witnessed was, after the day ended of a long day of teaching, we would get in the car and my grandmother would drive to every single house of every single student who didn't show up, right? To make sure they had what they needed, to make sure everything was okay, and to really center their humanity. Of course, I was like, I want to go play. What are we doing? And it wasn't until I reflected back that that was really her embodying that sense of purpose, empathy, and love. And so she taught me firsthand about leading with love. So to be able to do it in this way, and how do we really think about not how to make just people Berkeley ready, but actually how to make UC Berkeley people ready, right? And all their full humanity and all of those things. And so, saying lead with love, I was able to sort of center that framework and really thinking about how does transformation look in that space.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's wonderful. Could you highlight some of the success stories that you have done so far in terms of advancing DEIBJ at Berkeley? Because now it's your third year as the Vice Chancellor and also the Chief DI Officer. And can you also share with us in terms of the ongoing challenges that remain to be addressed on campus?
Yeah, absolutely. So I forgot to also name in the earlier section, a lot of the framework is also based on bell hooks. If you're not familiar, I highly recommend, particularly All About Love, the new vision. So one of the things bell hooks talks about is because love is necessary work, and is in love that we learn to resist, to thrive, and lead under any circumstances. She talks about the heart of justice being truth-telling and seeing ourselves in the world as it is rather than the way we want it to be. And I think as a society, we need truth-telling more than ever. So that leads me to sort of answer your question and what does it mean to be this truth-telling campus? And Cathy, I'm not at 3 years yet. That's in August. But in Berkeley, it feels like 150 years sometimes. But you're right. I'm incoming on that second year. And so for us has been leading that thriving initiatives, right? Really thinking about how do we center communities and dismantle systemic oppression in a way that benefits everyone, right? So I love the Cal for All, the thriving communities, that is in complete alignment with that. And we've hired directors of transformations for that. So really also being able to ground the work in ways that there are people responsible to help roll it out and hold our campus accountable. We're also leading a lot of engagement with Cabinet and our Council of Deans to keep continuing to center this work and a centralized DEIBJ strategy. So everyone is doing the things in sync and collectively. I think Berkeley is such an innovative space. And, we want to engender that creativity and spirit, and at the same time, build that connectivity to the center, right to the heart. If you think about it, right? So you lead with love and you center to the heart. So how are we flowing that love and that transformation from there? Really also being a space of budget advocacy, right? I think that's something that, there's such a thing as thriving financially as well. Creating a culture of care, right? And transformation. So how do we do compassionate care in all those aspects, which extends from the classroom to the residential halls to research labs and all of those things. So some of the challenges have really built on addressing systemic barriers. We know institutions of higher education were not built with everyone. People also often ask me, from federal public defense work to hear what's the difference. And I said, in many ways, there are still jail cells. It's just the bars are invisible to some, right? So how do we really think about dismantling that? But they're still there, right? And how do we visibilize that so that when we remove that for everyone, it's actually a benefit to everyone, right? And it's not give to this to take away from that. Creating a more inclusive curriculum, right? And really, oftentimes for those of you who've gone to PhD programs or all of those things, those pieces are not taught. You're taught how to research, right? So how do we build that piece of creating learning and community as a way that's not so transactional, but really becomes transformative in that. And really thinking about fostering a deep sense of belonging for all of our community members, right? So really taking shape with incoming class and outgoing alumni, right? So you as an alumni as extensions of that sense of belonging. You may have heard about this, but academic freedom versus freedom of speech. Right. So just because we have freedom of speech and academic freedom, it doesn't mean that there isn't accountability for that expression and action. So wanting to create the university as a place of psychological safety and transformative care, but really requiring us to be thoughtful about how do we hold up our principles of community and engage in thoughtful expression of that. There's also this notion of punitive versus growth culture, right? So how do you shift into a culture that honors restorative justice, where process yields growth versus punishment? Oftentimes people want to sort of move into that punishment, but really ensuring that people know that the university's role is really to foster thoughtful problem-solving, critical inquiry, right? The purpose of education is critical inquiry, thoughtful leaders, and not necessarily tell people what to think. And there's been a national backlash against this work. You know, I've often said that there are so many reasons why some of my colleagues have had to take a lay low strategy, but you know, we are UC Berkeley, right? We are a go bold, go high that's really embedded into our missions and values, and really thinking about those who organize against DEIBJ are feeling the pressure, right, of efforts of that things. I remember at the same time drawing in bell hooks, it's sometimes people see your power and they don't want it to exist, right? So how do we keep existing and resisting in these spaces? So it's really thinking about, this isn't new for those of you, right, the long arc of history, but the struggle has been really thinking about how do we create a culture of equity and belonging across the board. And so I'm proud to be a part of an institution that is really affirmative, and many people look as to a national beacon of light for this, you know. And as I told my colleagues, I said, we have a responsibility to you who may not be able to right now to keep doing this work and stay grounded in our mission and values.
Thank you. Thank you for you and your team's amazing work. I think when you talk about the culture of, equity and belonging, it links to kind of the Berkeley's Thriving Initiative. We would love to have you share more about the initiative and their impact and how they contribute to the building a more inclusive ecosystem on campus, because that's something that's new for some of our older alums. So we would love to hear from you the latest initiative. Yeah.
What I love about them, so thriving.berkeley.edu is my plug, but I'll talk about them a little more, is that we are tackling systemic oppression sort of in its multiplicity, recognizing that it doesn't just occur in a singular aspect, but that, you know, our students, our faculty, our staff are intersectional, right? And so systems of oppression also occur in that way. So how do we develop these as multifaceted interventions and programs that really foster that sense of belonging, culturally responsive, and they've been quite successful in increasing retention rates, academic success, but also overall well-being for our students, staff, and faculty. And so there's a opportunity in the multiplicity of them to really change effectively within populations, but also as a collective, right? So as I was talking about, as you're addressing the needs of one, it's actually removing systemic barriers that you see across multiple communities and to the benefit of all. And so it also contributes to an overall enhancements of the Cal community experience, right? And really having our alums be such vital parts of it. Many of them have alumni involvement. And, you know, I also would ask if anyone's interested, once they check out the website, to please not hesitate to reach out. I think thriving is something that, you know, often when I fly out of Oakland Airport, I see that thrive, right? But that's Kaiser, right? That's clinical. It's right. And so people think about it in kind of that medical way, but for us, it's really how do we create that in a sort of holistic way, right? That addresses disability justice, that addresses economic justice, that addresses all these different needs that happen in tandem, right? Oftentimes the students we serve, they're not just in one of our programs. I see them in multiple areas in multiple ways because they are system impacted in multiple ways. And so to see them thrive is such an honor, and to be able to lead that collectively with others even more so.
Great, thank you. And you just mentioned about the alumni engagement. As we explore opportunity for greater alumni engagement, could you share which specific thriving initiative you believe will benefit most from alumni involvement in promoting social justice and equity for the Cal alumni community?
Cathy, you can't make me pick a favorite child. I have to say all of them, and that they're emerging, right? That they're growing, and that they're growing in the spirit of community. So I would say the overall Thriving Initiatives framework is really great, and that's the way we're building it all. But also really thinking about its time, talent, and treasure, right? And so how can our alumni engage in mentorship programs, providing students with support of similar backgrounds, right? There's nothing more powerful than, again, people seeing themselves in your journey and saying, look, I'm here and look at where I am, and having met our alums, amazing, no matter where they are, right? That the brilliance really comes through. Involvement in career development workshops, internships, networking events, also, you know, those tailored to underrepresented students as well. Oftentimes we get sort of the comments of how do we reflect the diverse experiences of all of our students, and, you know, recognize that around that. And then collaborating with alumni to establish scholarship funds, research opportunities, right? And really grounding in that, community outreach initiatives, and things that really promote equitable experiences and opportunities for all. And if you have another brilliant idea, please bring it forward. I think the ability to co-create and design in things that might not exist yet is even more powerful then.
Thank you. Those are great ideas, ways we can get more of our alum engaged to support the campus and support our student community. So before we wrap up with tonight's fireside chat, I have a couple questions wanting to see kind of your vision for the future. So looking ahead, what do you identify as top priorities for Berkeley's leadership and campus units in ensuring thriving communities for all? You mentioned about some of the challenges that we are experiencing right now on campus, both in terms of financial, budgetary, and kind of just campus atmosphere. Where do you see kind of the ways that the leadership should be working on in terms of the top priorities for those?
Yeah, so one of them, I think, and I alluded to it a little earlier, is right. How do we create the heart of this work as the centralized DEIBJ strategy and connectivity of which all else flows, right? So I think that alignment and sort of moving forward together becomes really critically important, so that we're not duplicative and we're sort of creative in that other, you know, sort of unique way that makes Berkeley, Berkeley. Strengthening the partnership within campus units, community organizations, and alumni, right? So what we're doing here right now tonight with all of you to increase our efforts, I always say we're better together, right? And what does that look like? Enhancing the opportunities to educational resources, scholarships, mentorship opportunities to create a more inclusive and supportive environment. I always tell people, you know, I'm not here because I was lucky. I'm not here because of career opportunities. I'm here because of the community. Almost every single program I did or opportunity I got was someone told me to look into it or said, have you thought about this? Or all those opportunities, things I wouldn't have imagined. Actually, even this work, right? It was a mentor at my undergrad who was like, have you thought about this? And I was like, no, right? My mom says I have a good mouth, so I need to a big mouth, so I need to use it to get into some good trouble, right? So it's not on accident that law was an area I picked, right? Because I wanted to translate it for communities and transform it. Thinking about how do we foster a culture of continuous learning, right? So much of this work is not static, right? It evolves and flows with communities and as community grows, but also learning how to address systemic inequalities and promoting social justice that you said. So also grounding that equity inclusion work is research, right? And it's research for the collective good. And so the world is really watching, right? One of the things I love is this incredible platform that Berkeley has. People watch and take our lead. So many of our programs has become models not only across the UC, but across the nation. And there's so much pride in that and potential for impact. And so how are we being really thoughtful on what that is and what people are looking to us to do?
Thank you. Thank you. Our final question, I think you already kind of touched upon that a few times already. So how do you envision collaborating with Berkeley's alum leaders to advance the vision of Cal Fall and Berkeley for Life? You mentioned several different ways of doing that. Are there any other things we can especially support your division in the work that to build a more inclusive culture on campus and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always loved the thought partnership that comes from our alumni community. And so I am in the midst of forming an advisory board alumni council. So the minute you see that announcement, please consider it. And I know folks might be different points in their volunteerism. I'll go back a little bit to truth telling, right? So really that call for our alumni to share what their experiences were like post Berkeley graduates, so we can further institutional change with your input and feedback, right? And so there's so much that also comes from reflection, right? That maybe at the moment while you were here, you know, it takes some years back to really think about, oh, you know, I want to change this and transform this. And we're very aware and honest that there is a diversity of experience with folks and their engagement with the institution. Collaborating with Berkeley's DEIBJ Alumni Leadership Council. So how do we leverage expertise, insights, and networks to advance those communities, and in partnership with that, engaging our Cal alumni mentors, right, to be able to provide that guidance that I talked about, professional development, and jointly advancing this Cal for All, Berkeley for Life, and the alumni-led initiatives that promote diversity, equity, inclusion. So I know there's quarterly town halls, CAA chapters. I'm about to get on the road to do our yield events, and seeing how many alumni show up like across the nation is really so powerful. Because like I say, one thing is listening to sort of the vice chancellor. It's still funny to me how many people say like, "Oh my God, it's the vice chancellor." I'm like, "I'm just Dania. What are you talking about?" But the alumni community that you all bring, right, and that perspective and experience and connectivity is really, really powerful. And so I thank you for all the time that you donate to that. And I'll leave it there.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Dania. I want to express our gratitude to you for your experience, vision for a more inclusive Berkeley. Your leadership journey and commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion really inspire us all to strive for positive change within our community. Let's continue our work together towards building thriving communities where everyone feels valued and empowered. So please join me giving a round of applause to Vice Chancellor Matos for her inspiring leadership and dedication. Thank you, Dania, for your insightful contribution to tonight's fireside chat. Thank you.
I so appreciate this. Is all of us, right? I'm just one person. So really looking forward to connecting with all of you if I don't know you already. Thank you, Cathy.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Dania. Really appreciate it. So now we will transition to the next segment of tonight's programming. Let me introduce our panel moderator, Diego, VP of Internal Affairs of Berkeley Chicanx Latinx Alumni Association. Diego is a proud Ecuadorian American first-generation graduate from UC Berkeley, class of 2006. At Cal, he majored in civil engineering and minored in Chicano studies. He has proudly pushed for the redefinition of Chicanx as a cultural movement that expands deep into the American continents, a challenge that he often characterized as tougher than learning Mandarin. Upon finishing UC Berkeley, Diego moved back to Southern California and began his push towards making a difference in the STEM community through advocacy. His technical expertise is in civil infrastructure, with an emphasis on water resources, wastewater treatment, and sustainability. He got his master's in construction management from the University of Southern California in 2022, but still hates the color red. Right, so go Bears. Diego is currently a principal civil engineer with Walt Disney. He has 18 years of domestic and international experience in the design and construction of several major infrastructure projects. While his career path has taken him from UAE to China and across the United States, Diego maintains a resolve to find his way back to the roots from which he came, one engineering problem at a time. Diego currently lives in Los Angeles, considering his family his biggest source of strength, and is a huge advocate for youth and professional development within his Latinx community. In his free time, he obsesses over the Los Angeles Football Club, the best tacos in LA, and the general meaning of life. So now let's welcome Diego for moderating our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. So, every time I hear that, it makes me feel super awkward and embarrassed, but I think that that's part of the imposter syndrome that we all sort of need to get over at some point or another, right? So, yes, I'm very, very, very happy to be here. This is a very important conversation, and a conversation that is very dear to all of our hearts, and in representation of so many people, my family, my fellow friends at UC Berkeley, my alumni association, and everyone. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. And I'm super privileged to be able to share this space with three incredibly impressive individuals that kind of make my bio seem a little bit student-ish, because that's how awesome they are. But I'm very happy to be here with them. So I'm going to start by introducing Jan Shelley Brown, JSB, class of 2014. Jan Shelley helps financial institutions use technology to drive change and create lasting impact. A technologist at heart, her expertise lies at the intersection of digital technology and risk and security. She helps chief information officers and senior IT leaders define the business value of technology. She's passionate about leading core technology transformations in financial services in highly regulated industries, including cloud migration, security, agile, and DevOps. With a professional and academic background in software engineering, she brings a wealth of experience to her client work. She has built large-scale tech systems and led software delivery teams for leading global financial institutions. In addition to her client work, JSB is active in McKinsey's efforts to advance racial equity and inclusion growth globally. Previously, Jen Shelley was Vice President of Technology at Goldman Sachs. She holds an MBA from UC Berkeley and a bachelor's degree in computer science from Howard University. So welcome me and help me in welcoming JSB to the room. We're incredibly happy to have you join us today. We also are going to be joined by Dr. Kenichi Soga, PhD class of 1994. Dr. Soga is the Donald H. McLaughlin Professor in Mineral Engineering and a Chancellor Professor at UC Berkeley. Dr. Soga is also the Director of the Berkeley Center for Smart Infrastructure, a faculty scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and serves as a special advisor to the Dean of College of Engineering for Resilient and Sustainable Systems. Has published more than 450 journal and conference papers, and is the co-author of Fundamentals of Soil Behavior. I've actually read a part of that with Professor James Mitchell. Dr. Soga's research focuses on infrastructure sensing, performance-based design, maintenance of infrastructure, energy geotechnics, and geomechanics. He's also a member of several professional organizations, including the National Academy of Engineering, a fellow of the UK Royal Academy of Engineering, the Institution of Civil Engineering's ICE, American Society of Civil Engineers, and the Engineering Academy of Japan. He is the recipient of several notable awards, including the George Stephenson Medal and Telford Gold Medal from ICE in 2006, the Walter Huber Civil Engineering Research Prize from ASCE in 2007, and the UCB Becker Prize for his work on commercialization of smart infrastructure technologies in 2022. Dr. Soga obtained his PhD in civil engineering from UC Berkeley and his master's and bachelor's from Kyoto University. So help me in welcoming Dr. Soga to the room. And last but not least, we have Nicole Carlotto, class of 2009. Nicole works for the University of California System, the Office of Federal Government Relations, where she serves as the Director of Communications and Advocacy in this role. She helps amplify the voices of UC advocates in Washington, D.C., which includes leading federal engagement with UC Grassroots Advocacy, the UC Advocacy Network. Prior to joining UC, Nicole worked for George Washington University as a Media Relations Associate, and before GW, she worked as a press assistant for former California Senator Barbara Boxer. Nicole is a California native, received her bachelor's in sociology from UC Berkeley, and her master's in strategic public relations from George Washington University. So help me in welcoming Nicole. Okay, so I think the way that we're going to go about this as a conversation, and it's always tricky with our mute, unmute, and with Zoom, but we're going to try to keep this as organic as possible. I'm going to ask a series of questions. We're going to go from everywhere from who we are to who we are at work, to how we feel about everything happening at UC Berkeley, and then offering some insights on where we think the future is for our students, our alumni, and our communities. So with that said, I'm gonna ask each of our panelists this question, and we'll start with JSB. If you don't mind sharing a little bit your thoughts on how you define DEI. So what does DEI mean to you?
Yeah, thank you, Diego. So I think, when we think about the formal definition of DEI, right? Like we know that at the end of the day, it is providing the right support, the right kind of structures in place such that different groups, different ethnicities, different genders can all have access and support to different resources, right, in institutions. What does that mean to me? It means empowerment, it means authenticity, and following the Vice Chancellor, it means love, right? It means that when I walk into a building, when I walk into a room, that I or folks that look different from me all feel similarly welcome, all feel that I have the same access to doing a good job and feeling like I'm promoted, or access to resources in the same way, and I feel as if I belong, right? So from a definition perspective, that's what I think DEI means.
Dr. Thoga, would you like to follow on what DEI means to you?
Yes, thanks, Diego, and great to know you're from civil engineering departments, where I'm from. For me, everybody has a different stories, how they grew up and how things happened to their life. And for me, I started when I was born in the U.S. with Japanese parents who moved to the U.S. as a sort of find a job in the U.S. and then moved back to Japan and came to Cal to do my PhD. And then spent 20 years in the UK. And then about 7 years ago, I came back to Berkeley. So for me, it's really trying to understand who I am and getting to know who the others are. And that's what I'm sort of a DEI for me. But at the same time, I just want to talk a little bit more about as a civil engineer. And Diego, you know more than I do, perhaps, that we design our infrastructure for 100 years. So our design life is 100 years. We want to prolong our life of our infrastructure for 150 years. And then we start to see aging infrastructure. Our Cal campus is also aging infrastructure, but they're beautiful buildings. But at the same time, we want to do a great stuff within our infrastructure that we have. At the same time, our society changed every 20, 30 years. Berkeley was different 20 years ago, or it may be totally different after 20 years. So how do we adapt our system to make sure that it's right for this generation, next generation, and the following generation? For me, that's DEI, trying to say, how can we make sure that it's the right thing for everyone?
Thank you for that perspective. And I have opinions on the engineering buildings on campus and their aging infrastructure. Nicole, would you like to share a little bit about what DEI means to you, please?
Sure. So building on what we've heard, so far, for me, I really, DEI really, it represents a commitment to fostering environments where people can really, people from all backgrounds can feel valued and respected and, empowered to be able to fully participate in, in society and contribute. And, to me, when Cathy and I were first talking about, participating in this panel, we were having this really great conversation about, thinking about, diversity and equity and inclusion from all different lenses. And, we started talking about, I'm actually from rural Northern California. I grew up in a town of 3,000 people. It's where I did middle school and high school. The closest city was an hour away. And coming to Berkeley, even though I was born in the Bay Area, that's not where I really grew up. It was a culture shock. And as a first generation college student, and those experiences I had at Cal and learning about this world that was so different from where I had spent much of my youth, really motivated me to, go into this career path that I have now. And I want to be able, I feel fortunate that where I work and what I get to do, I try to get to, help create a space for others to have a voice and advancing, the priorities that I'm working on, but hopefully for those who agree with those as well. And so, I feel like there's this merging of these worlds, and I feel really fortunate for that.
Absolutely, and it's a blessing and a burden all at the same time, to kind of hold that responsibility. But I think a lot of us are happy to do that good work. If we can, JSB, if we can talk a little bit about maybe, when we look at DEI, normally we sort of see like what impact means, what's the end goal. maybe you want to sort of share a perspective or experience or story in which you sort of explain how DEI has been important in community building.
Yeah. Maybe two things, one personal and one kind of data point to show how it works when you get it right. On the personal front, what I think is interesting is, so I think, Diego, when you introduced my background, I'm a computer scientist by training. I spent 6 years or so building software, right, for a living. And that's one of the reasons I actually came to Cal, but I digress. What is interesting, Diego, in terms of this story where I think DI is really important is I have been in situations with clients where I am the only in the room. And I've been in a situation where the CIO of an organization wanted to have the technical person in the room to stand up and explain a topic, right? And literally pointed to the gentleman next to me because he was the oldest, he was a white male. He looked the part, I guess, if you looked online and Googled technologist, he looked that part. Even though that individual had a poetry degree and never wrote a line of code in his life. And he overlooked me, even though I qualified myself as someone that was a technologist. And I tell that story to indicate that it is often the case where, from a DI perspective, our own biases cloud the opportunities, the kind of access that folks who don't look like us, whatever us means, they don't look like the majority, can have. That's when it goes wrong, right? I was impeded from an opportunity. When it goes right, there's a very public story where Walmart, as an organization, for example, has done studies on where there's social mobility issues with their frontline workers, right? And because, call it 40% of their workforce on the front line are Black and Latina, they actually put interventions in place to address the fact that that population did not have the same access to promotions to the next job level than their peer group, right? They dug in, they found the data, they put the interventions in the right place. And now you see on the backside of it, 87% of them are, now eligible to be promoted because they have the right skill sets, they had the right training, they had the right upskilling, and you can put that program in place. And now you're seeing 20% better retention, right? Publicly known fact, when it's done right versus when it's done wrong. So to me, it's quite clear.
No, you're right, and we have to kind of look at that in both of those lenses, absolutely. And which then would lead me to then, in order to be able to support leadership in these fields, and maybe Nicole, you can share a little bit on this. Like, what are those attributes and skills that are needed, to enforce and empower this kind of change or this DEI empowerment?
So, I think that so many, but I think it's important to recognize that, leaders can't be everything. And, so I think it's important to lean into what skills or your strengths. I think one thing that has been top of mind for me lately is empathy. I think that's really important for being able to understand and connect with others, from whether it's different backgrounds, whether that means you're first generation or you're, different economics, all the above. So I think that it's really important to have, that empathy, and really having empathy to foster trust, to build relationships, and to be able to effectively, develop inclusive practices and policies where, thinking at it from, the leadership workplace, that others are, believe in and want to be part of, because it's not just coming from the top down, where you have a leader that is really trying to make that inclusive space and have people be brought along. through the process.
Yeah, and I think along those lines, if we start thinking of what we've done then in our workplaces and in those spaces in which we have this professional identity that has to coincide with our personal identity and however we identify. If Dr. Soga, if you don't mind, as we start looking at the workplace space, can you talk a little bit about examples in which you've been capable of engaging allies and advocates and promoting these DEI initiatives?
Yes. As an engineer and myself, I talk about space and time and all these things. And then when you do a DEI, you start to realize that everybody has a different space in terms of size, but at the same time, we also have to look at different space, that everybody has a different space. Some people may look at really locally, but some people may look at really globally, and they look at different places. But at the same time, time changes. Everybody has a different time of appreciating certain things. So again, the time is different, appreciation of time, how you recognize that is different. So that particular appreciation of time and space in the workspace is, I think it's a very important aspect that I'm trying to sort of embrace myself, but also trying to, when we work with the community members, also they have a different time and space. And so I'm rather abstract in this particular point, but then you can see that I just want to bring in that particular component about the space and time, and everybody has a different way of looking at things.
And therein lies the challenge, right? Because the definition is so different for each of us, and then the skills that we have to kind of realize that are also different. And then I think at work, there's always the perception that we are checking the box with DEI, and if we can get into that conversation a little bit, and I'm going to pivot a little bit to JSB. There are certain initiatives that happen in a workplace in which you try to bring in DEI, but how do we then embed that into an organization's values and practices? Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, maybe one thought is the case for DEI. Research shows that companies, organizations that have gender or racial equity, because we've done studies on both, outperform on organizations that don't. And we've done it at kind of the board level or like the leadership level, but it's for a number of reasons. And I think in this collective group, we probably recognize why, right? So the case for it, I think we first need to start with, because Diego, most institutions, ultimately, this is for the holistic benefit of the organization to serve their stakeholders, right? To serve their customers, to better retain employees. So that's number one. And that has that aspiration, that ambition on why we're doing it needs to be very clear. The second thing that matters a lot on that we see in terms of making sure that something becomes ingrained, what you can't measure, you can't track, therefore will not become ingrained. You need to be very clear on what are the KPIs and how are we holding leaders and the broader organization accountable for those KPIs. At one rung of the curve, it may be retention metrics. That's just the start of the journey. But there are so many other things like inclusivity, like belonging, that matter as we think about those KPIs. So what are the organization's starting point and what is our ambition and how are we tracking every single leader against that, right? We've often found that without those structural things in place, it is often very hard for an organization to keep that momentum in order to move the needle on DEI and ingrain it in a culture, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you, as you were speaking on that, it kind of took me back to, being a student at UC Berkeley, and where we sort of learned to navigate that in itself. If we rewind a little bit to the mindset of a student before we get into this workspace where essentially the bureaucracy of it all and the bottom line, the profitability, all these phrases start becoming buzzwords into how we define and measure success. Can we talk a little bit then about what DEI may have been when we were students, whether at UC Berkeley or in our respective universities that we started in? And maybe Nicole, you can talk a little bit about that. How has it evolved from the time that you were first studying this space as a student to where you may be now?
In all honesty, I don't think I heard the word DEI back in the 2000s, back when I was in college. When I arrived, as I mentioned earlier, I came from a very small town that was not very diverse in California, and coming to Berkeley was a completely new world for me, and one that was it was wonderful. It's where it shaped who I am, and I met people. I remember thinking, I've never met anyone who has done this or has come from here, or I'm trying to think, had I been out of California? But I think I'd been to maybe 2 other states by the time I went to college, and so it just wasn't something that I think was really being thought about in a conscious way. And so now to hear about the Thriving Initiative and just the proactive work that is being done, and I see it being done from the top down at the university system, all the way from the University of California president, from his priorities down to the campuses. It's incredible, and I think that continued steady drumbeat of proactive, but then also recognizing us as we're alumni, but even as students, and acknowledging that the continual work of learning and growing and meeting people where they are is so important. And so I think this is 20 years ago, I was not thinking about this.
Yeah, and I think and then if I sort of flip the question in sort of a different way, I think and then whether JSB or Dr. Soga, you want to chime in with this, what is it that's happening at Cal right now? And I think Dania very, very beautifully and eloquently kind of went through all this. What are those resources or opportunities that you see now that maybe when you were a student, whether it was at Cal or at your respective schools, you could have used to sort of pivot or change the way that you approached this effort? Maybe we can start with JSB. Like what is it now?
Yeah, the reflection I have, well, maybe a couple of things. Number one is, so I was born in the Caribbean, so DEI wasn't even part of my vernacular, right? Which is interesting. And I came to a historically Black college or university, Howard University, which in itself served as a bit of a microcosm, right, of what the broader US was. And so to me, the evolution of DEI over time has been quite interesting, right? If I look at, call it pre-pandemic to now, and we look at how much money, how much public commitments were made towards DEI, there's been a hockey stick. One can argue now with the Supreme Court ruling, there's a little bit of a hiccup, right, on how companies are vocally coming out, but the initiatives are there, right? And I think, Nicole, you mentioned it, right? Like if we look at when I was on college campuses, not to date myself, DEI was like one group's problem as opposed to an institutional problem, where there was an institutional mandate, remit, commitment. That has evolved since then, right? I was honored to serve as the VP of Diversity for Haas in my time there, but it wasn't as inculcated, I would say, in the other kind of facets of the community, as I feel like diversity and inclusion is right now today, a part of every conversation.
And yes, and I, before Dr. Soga, you chime in, it's kind of what I personally struggled at Cal with as well. I think, you know, civil engineering major with a Chicano studies minor, and people were thinking, what the heck are you even doing?
Mm.
And it was because, you know, we all needed that space. So I think from your perspective, when
Yeah.
we look at these institutional components of DEI, where do you see a professional alumni navigating that as opposed to maybe back then?
Yeah, so when I was a student, it's a similar experience. But then I think similar to sustainability, it's becoming a paradigm in a sense that, okay, now we agree that it's the right thing to do. So DEI is becoming a paradigm. And through that process, it comes into teaching, education. And that's what I see when I was a civil engineer. Diego, I'm not sure how you were, but when I was a civil engineer, taught by our professors, say, okay, let's make bridge, let's make tunnels. But we didn't really think about, if we make that, what's going to happen to the community? What kind of effect it's going to be? But then now we start to discuss that within our contextual in teaching and that sort of thing. So for me, in a sense that like sustainability and DEI is becoming like a paradigm, which is why I think it's so positive. But at the same time, it evolves. So I'm quite interested in how it's going to evolve in a 10 years time, 20 years time, 50 years time, 100 times here, when my future generations, how are they going to think about this? So I think that's where the excitement is.
Yeah, and then we don't necessarily need to think of these things as sort of separate entities, do we? You know, I think it's how do they play off of each other? Oftentimes, whether you know, all of us, whether we were studying sociology, Nicole, or whether we were you know, doing computer science or civil engineering, one is not independent of the other. Everything plays off of each other. We're part of this giant ecosystem, this network of what progress means for our communities. And if we then look at it from that perspective, for anyone, you know, that has joined this call, that's trying to get tips on, hey, I want to be a DEI leader. I consider myself a DEI leader. What advice, and if you know, we'll go around the room for this one, what kind of advice would we give our Cal alumni and our potential Cal alumni on how to create positive impact in their communities? Do we want to start with Nicole, please?
Sure. Man, I don't even know, where do you start? I mean, I think something that I really focus on for myself is that, you know, never stop listening, never stop learning, and never stop growing. And I think that, you know, this work, it starts with ourselves, and then taking that out in whether that's with your alumni club or with your friends or in the professional space. You know, and as you know, as Vice Chancellor Matos says, you know, it's community work. And I really do think we all have a role to play. And that doesn't have to be something big, right? It could be, there's all different levels. And so it's just finding what your space is, where your comfort levels are, and starting there.
I think for me, it is try to create inclusive environments, and do that by being curious, educating yourself, right? Continue your learning journey about others. It will help you build advocacy. And I think the second thing is be that person who sees a problem and takes action on that problem, right? Mahatma says, be the change you want to see. So take that problem, that nuance that you see, and help drive that to action for, you know, whatever you see that is impacting DEI. Those are, I think, the two kind of macro comments for me.
Yeah, and I agree on that. It's about sort of making actions. And I think we can all make actions in a different way. And teaching, that's what I've tried to do in terms of how being taught, how can we change it to bring this to new paradigms, bring it into our teaching. At UC Berkeley, I'm quite excited right now because we have this cluster hires where we bring different disciplines together in a new area. And I'm not sure you heard about it, but then we have like sort of a cluster hire of climate equity and environmental justice. For example, we got people from different disciplines coming together, and that's a great action, for example. We have a sort of cluster hire on the understanding bracket, non-bracket citizenship, for example. That's another excitement, is how do we bring it together? So I think the Berkeley, I'm so happy to have Berkeley because we're pushing that boundary or make that paradigm to the next level of paradigm with these actions.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that you keep using the word paradigm, because I think that that's just so fundamentally important to how we need to start looking at this, not as a trend, not as a forced, requirement that we all have to sort of abide by, but the way that we think and the way that we sort of operate in a personal and professional setting. I think if we were to, you're going to have to excuse me because I do work for Imagineering, as you said, for Disney, and we're about the storytelling of it all, and if we can get a little bit of idealists in what we want the story of DEI to be in the future, what kind of thoughts come about when we say, like, I hope that one day, I aspire that one day DEI becomes this? Where do you each sort of see the next frontier and what DEI is? What kind of story do we want to keep telling to our future generations?
Maybe I could start. So in a sense, every paradigm start from the struggle, I think. Like aging infrastructure we talked about, we struggle. And then we say, sometimes there's a negative feeling about it. And then you belong to something, but then it protects your community, which is not good because it's not open. It becomes closed. And so for me, it's really from that negativeness to how do we make it positive, make it optimistic about it? What is the optimism of this? Is something that we can try. And having that sort of a bringing that paradigm to optimistic paradigm is where I like to see.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Dr. Suga. I think it is going to get a bit harder. But that being said, I think for me, I would like us to not have like formal structures on it, but it's the same way we think about it as part of like a talent strategy. Like it doesn't have to be a thing on its own. It just becomes something that's pervasive because we've indoctrinated it in how we do business, how we, do recruiting, how we do admissions, right? It's just a part of how we think, as opposed to something that we still need to justify to exist.
And building on what we both said, I think I would love to see a world where, maybe identities are incredibly important, but also in some space where we kind of have more just kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Cross collaboration isn't the right word, but almost just where, as you were saying, JSB, just where you're not, it just becomes part of us, and we're not, just here's one, we're working on this and we're working on this, but it's just we're all moving forward together, and it just kind of becomes part of that, part of that second nature, recognizing there's always going to be work, there's always going to be more to be done, but I think just, yeah, I'll stop there.
And I love the sort of the honesty about that, because I think that so often, and I mean, we graduated from UC Berkeley. We know that it's going to be super tough before we can be happy and say, hey, we did it and all that. And I want to echo that sentiment. I think, as as a Latinx person in this world, and in these times, we constantly are fighting ourselves and each other. We're not competing for space. We're not competing for, no, this is at some point something that we all sort of have to do together. I think that is what will make us be, once we're unified on, suddenly everything becomes just synonymous with norm. Like, yeah, we're all paying attention to these things. It isn't it isn't something that belongs to this group or doesn't. It actually belongs to all of us. So I think I'm going to try to, at this point, we had about 10 minutes left. So for those of us that are brave enough, if you want to add any questions to the Q&A, we're going to start going through those as best as we can. And so we're going to start with the first question that we're here is from Jason. Thank you, Jason, for the question. DEI seems to include belonging, which makes me reflect on authenticity. But what is the difference between professional and personal behavior if authenticity is the goal? Would anyone like to take that one?
I'd actually love to jump in on that one. You know, so for me, one of the reasons that I work where I do for the University of California system is because of the mission of the institution, of education, public service. I am personally very driven by mission work, and that has been kind of how I've chosen my career path so far. And you know, in particular, communications and working in grassroots advocacy, being able to, you know, provide opportunities for people to have a voice in issues for an organization that is working for a mission that I personally believe in. A long-winded way of saying that, you know, I've chosen a career path that has allowed me to be authentic with my belonging, because I get to carry out my, you know, the values align professionally with who I am personally. And to me, that's been very important.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. And again, if anyone else, and at some point we're going to ask each other questions, so we will get slightly informal for a second. There is something to be said about how belonging changes. You know, even in this in right now this call, when you sort of see the names, you see how different each of us are, but then how we're all sort of celebrating ourselves and each other. We started in the very, very beginning before everyone joined. And I got asked a really cool question, which is like, how do you actually pronounce your last name? And I stressed the importance for my own sanity to add the accent mark over my A. And that's complicated sometimes because it means that when sometimes like I'll get something in the mail that has, you know, J and then a really weird character and then the rest of that. But we're having that conversation. And the belonging and the authenticity revolves around, you know, my pride, because at some point I wasn't necessarily comfortable. I was trying to find an English pronunciation of my name, and then why do I need to have an English pronunciation of my name if this is my name? This is what I was, you know, I should be super happy about. And even when I'm in a professional space, and then, you know, they people struggle, it's like, that's okay. That's like, but at least you're asking. And so I do feel that there is a distinction, but we don't necessarily need to code switch all the time with who we are at work and who we are in our personal lives. And there is a value to making belonging work when both are considered and both parts of our identities are there. So that's Jason, that was a brilliant question. So thank you for that. Out of curiosity, if we were to tell our younger selves, meaning when we were kids, hey, would you have what those differences that you experienced at that point, is the advice the same? Is the advice to your younger 10-year-old self similar to then how we are saying alumni could potentially help out? What do you tell 10-year-old self about how to navigate this space now that you've lived through the trials and tribulations of DEI across your professional and personal? What were those words of encouragement be at that point?
The only one I would add on is probably be brave. I think I think Diego, you said it at the beginning of this session, which is this notion of imposter syndrome. For me, I feel like I took a long time before I figured out how to own my own space how to be authentic, Jason, to your question. So for me, it's about be brave and just own who you are. That's the only person you can be, so be brave.
I love that. I spent a lot of my childhood not being brave and being had a lot of anxiety, and I think if I were that individual now, I think that I love that advice, especially where we are in the world now. It's an incredibly powerful message.
It's just my personal experience that I was just to tell when I was, if I'm my 10, at age of 10, just say, well, yeah, brave about, there's always somebody who may be able to help you. And listen, and that is something that generations do help each other in a certain way. And that's a little bit optimistic way of looking at things. But I think that's something I benefit a lot by sort of talking and then being brave to talk to each other. And then suddenly listen and say, oh, wow, there's somebody who can help me or who wants to help me. So just to get that particular feeling is a good thing to have.
That's our love language. That's the only love language that we need to know moving forward. And thank you for saying that, Dr. Soga. I think as we go into our daily lives, and tomorrow when we report to work, or on Monday when we report to work, and whenever that is, we have to keep being patient with ourselves and in how far we've come and how far we have left to go in this. And so DEI is not something that happens right away. It's not something that is like, one solve for all. It's complicated. It's difficult. It's a difficult conversation. It's controversial, and it has to be. It has to be because we're controversial and we're different and all that. So I wanted to end on that note, that we sort of each have to sort of find what that means to each of us, and how then do we give back in those spaces. So that's what our alumni associations are about, and that's what Cal is for all, at least in my book. So thank you, JSB, Nicole, Dr. Soga, for sharing this conversation and sharing a little bit about who you are, and for even hinting and addressing some vulnerabilities, which is key. So thank you for that, and to the rest of the CAA team, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I will try to share my proper screen this time. Okay, how's that starting? Good evening, everyone. I am Joanna Aguirre, she, her. I am the Senior Program Operating Officer at the Cal Alumni Association, and I'm grateful once again to be in community with you all. Thank you for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our inspirational alumni speakers, amazing work being done on campus to ensure a thriving community for all. I'm honored to be part of this program and grateful for everyone involved with this important series. The Cal Alumni Association has always existed with one purpose: to serve our Berkeley community. The first University of California graduates created the Alumni Association to ensure that future students would never be without community after Cal. Over the past 150 years that we have existed, we have offered programs to connect, engage, and inspire alumni to remain connected to UC Berkeley for life. And our goal remains steadfast to continue this work into the future. We strive to create an inclusive, vibrant community where alumni worldwide enjoy lifelong relationships with the university. The Cal Alumni Association is an independent, nonprofit membership organization with many programs and departments to fit the needs of our diverse alumni community. We have over 60 affinity, cultural, and US-based regional alumni chapter networks. We publish California Magazine, an award-winning and editorially independent publication sharing stories about the world of Berkeley and Berkeley in the world. Cal Discoveries Travel is a global educational alumni travel program for lifelong learners. The Lair of the Bear is an outdoor camp and retreat center in Pinecrest, California. We offer a robust range of volunteer opportunities to support undergraduate scholarships and student programming. The Achievement Award Program, or TAP, the Leadership Award, African American Initiative Scholarship, the Mildred Jordan Sharp Scholarship, the Cal Pride Scholarship, as well as the Native American Scholarship, as well as our Cal Alumni Mentors Program, connecting alumni and students from first-generation, low-income, and historically underserved and underrepresented communities at Cal. As you've heard today, the Cal Alumni Association is committed to ensuring a Cal for all. And this event celebrates and recognizes the work being done by alumni in our community, on the UC Berkeley campus, and through our alumni chapters. We hope that those in attendance today will leave with more information about what others are doing and how you yourself can be involved. As an organization, we continue building progress toward integrating more than just the letters D, E, I, B, and J. We strive to include diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice values into our business practices and programming. Today's conversations reflect our commitment to ensuring that all Cal alumni feel welcomed and a sense of belonging. As the Cal Alumni Association's updated mission and renewed vision statement demonstrate our continued commitment to our unparalleled alumni community, we celebrate lifelong, multifaceted relationships between alumni and our university, relationships which encompass learning, achievement, advocacy, service, philanthropy. By cultivating meaningful and inclusive experience for our alumni, we can contribute to an alumni culture that celebrates its diversity, creates belonging, and advances equity at UC Berkeley. I want to thank Cathy Han, Dania Matos, Diego Jácome, and our panelists for your partnership on this event. I'm grateful for your time and dedication to UC Berkeley and the Cal alumni community. Please join us on Wednesday, May 1st for our final Cal for All event of this academic year, where we will hear from UC Berkeley's Dean of the College of Engineering, Dr. Su J. King Liu, and a panel discussion with Colette Pat, Assistant Dean for DEIBJ at the UC Berkeley College of Computing. Please take time to complete the post-event survey that will pop up when this event ends and will also be sent via email. We welcome your feedback so we can continue to make improvements. To learn more about the Cal Alumni Association and the DEIBJ work being done on the UC Berkeley campus, please visit alumni.berkeley.edu and diversity.berkeley.edu. And now, if you'd like to pull out your smartphone, please scan this QR code if you would like to support the work of the UC Berkeley Division of Equity and Inclusion. I will leave it up on the screen. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Fiat Lux and Go Bears.